بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Which basically means with the peace and blessings of Allah, God be upon you all. I hope you're all well. Today we're going to be talking about YOLO. You only live once. And YOLO is a very interesting concept. It's a very interesting philosophy. Because when I think of YOLO, what I think about is basically there is no hereafter. There's no supernatural. This is the only life that you're going to live. This is what I understand from the concept of YOLO. You only live once. There's no hereafter. There's no divine accountability. There's no sense of kind of ultimate justice, ultimate hope, ultimate purpose, ultimate value. It's just this life. And what follows from that is this sense of added materialism, because if all that there is this physical material world, then you're more likely to be far more materialistic. Right? And this is why YOLO, from a philosophical perspective, is connected with the philosophy of philosophical naturalism. Now, what does philosophical naturalism really mean? Philosophical naturalism means that there is no supernatural. Everything in the universe can be explained by physical processes. So I repeat, because I'm going to repeat this quite a bit, this term philosophical naturalism. Everything in the universe can be explained by physical processes. It can be reduced by physical processes or explained by physical processes, and there is no supernatural. That's the kind of underlying philosophy of YOLO. You only live once, no spirituality, no accountability, and that's it. Now for me, brothers and sisters and friends, I think this is a problematic philosophy. But some who have this kind of secular understanding, materialistic understanding, pseudo-scientific understanding, they think it's not even a question. You only live once. Of course you only live once. There's no evidence for the supernatural. There's no evidence for the hereafter. Absolutely zero evidence. So we shouldn't even question the fact that we only live once. Why question it? It's irrational. Don't be stupid. Live your life. Right? That's the kind of philosophy that we're hearing, especially when you look into popular culture, the media, the science magazines, right? But I think it's irrational to assert that. It's irrational to assert that you only live once. Extremely irrational. And I'm not saying this because there's evidence for the hereafter. There is, by the way, but I'm not saying it just for that. I'm saying it because to question something that didn't have to be is the mark of an intelligent mind. And this life didn't have to be. We didn't have to have this life. There's nothing necessary about your existence and my existence. We are contingent beings. We require an explanation. Right? Think about this. Imagine I sedated every single one of you in this room. I sedated every single one of you. And all of a sudden, you wake up, you're on a plane, Emirates, first class. You have the best food. You have gourmet meals. You have the best type of entertainment. Amazing sunset, sunrise. You have everything at your disposal. Amazing entertainment. You're fulfilling all of your desires and your wishes. Are you going to be happy in that state? Maybe for the first 5 minutes, you'll use all the gadgets and you eat all the food. But after a while, you're going to think, hold on a second. How did I get here? What am I supposed to do? I don't even have my passport. Where am I headed to? Where am I going? What's going to happen if and when I land? So you can't really be happy if you don't ask these questions. And also, which links back to the previous point, asking these questions then is a mark of an intelligent mind. Because you didn't have to be on the plane. Well, your life is no different. You didn't have to live. You didn't choose your birth. Of course you didn't. Right? You didn't even choose your gender. You didn't choose your DNA. You didn't choose your culture. You didn't even choose the socio-economic circumstances in which you were brought up. In actual fact, you didn't choose that you were going to be born in this amazing country called Wales. Well, some of you anyway. So the point here is, we should ask the question because it's the mark of an intelligent mind. And if you don't ask the question, right? If you don't ask the question, then maybe it's equivalent of a baby in a mother's womb questioning the fact that there's life after birth. Imagine the baby in the womb said, does mum exist? Do you get where I'm going with this? I'm trying to show to you, just because you have your immediate senses satisfied by a limited set of empirical data, you have no right to conclude the absolute. There may be other realms of existence. And we know this when it comes to the baby. The baby's empirical senses is satisfied by the limited data of the mother's womb. And that's it. So it's going to conclude there's only the womb. Right? There's only the womb. There is no life after birth. But we know that's not a valid question, right? Is there life after birth? Because we now understand there's another realm of existence. Similarly, if you reject the hereafter, or reject the fact that there is another life after this life, it's equivalent of saying, well, maybe there are no other galaxies. If you're a 7th century desert Arab looking into the ocean of space, you will conclude this Earth is the center of the universe. The galaxy is only the bunch of stars I see, is the sun that I see, is the moon, and that's it. There are no other galaxies. Is that a valid assertion to make? Of course not, because we now know there are other realms of existence, like this galaxy here. This is an amazing picture of the Andromeda galaxy. Now the point I'm trying to say here is, it's not valid to say that there is no hereafter just because you have limited empirical data at your disposal. Because there may be a future observation or indication that may contradict your current conclusion. So be open-minded. To be so dogmatic about the whole question that there is no hereafter is unscientific and irrational, and frankly is no different from the religious folk in the 15th century, the 16th century. And we know what happened. The religious wars, the 80-year wars, the 30-year wars, the massacre on St. Bartholomew's Day, because you had an interpretation of the Catholic Church that was preventing thinking that was incongruous against its own understanding about man, life, ethics, and the entire universe. So it's a valid question, people. Unless you're willing to accept that you have a childlike mentality, or the mentality of a 7th century desert Arab. But that's up to you. So the reason I mention this is to show that it's a valid question. You know what's very interesting? There's some very spooky evidence that supports the fact that there is a hereafter. Near-death experiences. Now you may be thinking, Hamza Tzortzis, he's gone crazy. Yes, he came late. Yes, he had a punctured tire. He seems quite tired. It's the end of the Phosis tour, right? The lecture tour. This guy's gone mad. He's been taking some stuff that he shouldn't be taking. What's this near-death experiences stuff all about? Well, let me just explain this to you. Near-death experiences is not some things that you now read on popular culture about spirituality, you know, the books at the bottom in some of the famous bookstores. The information I'm giving you is from peer-reviewed journals. There's a medical center nearby here. So everyone knows what the Lancet is. Put your hand up. Who's heard of the Lancet? Everybody. One of the most prestigious medical journals, yes or no? Yes, this information is from the Lancet. I believe it was published in 2001. The key researcher is Pim van Lommel. And it was a study of near-death experiences on patients that underwent some kind of heart surgery. Check it out for yourself. Now, what is a near-death experience? A near-death experience, brothers and sisters, is as follows. Imagine that I have a heart attack right here. God forbid. Well, some of you may be happy. You know, there's haters everywhere, but we love the haters. Islam teaches us to love haters as well. Because it's true. If you don't love people who hate, then what's the point of living, man? You gotta hate the lovers. Love the haters, rather. If you love the haters, then maybe from your love, they'll love you back. As Allah says in the Quran, what does He say? Respond to evil with that which is better. Respond to evil with good. Right? That's what the Quran says. Forgive and overlook. If they hate you, then don't make that hatred make you swerve from justice. Be just, as closer to God consciousness. So, you know, we love the haters. Okay? But I don't think there's any haters here because it's Wales, man. Wales is a lovely place. They love the Welsh accent. It's one of the most amazing accents in the world. Do you agree? Right? No? Because some of you are a bunch of Arabs, that's why you're here to study. Babes, what babes? Right? So, that was a half Pakistani, half Arab accent. So, near-death experiences, right? You know what's very interesting? If I had a heart attack, God forbid, and you call some paramedics, and they find that I'm comatose, I'm cyanotic, my skin's getting blue, and they start to give me CPR. As they give me CPR, what happens is, obviously my eyes are closed, I'm in a deep coma, the prognosis is like, you know what, you might not make it. So they're doing this for about 30 minutes. And during that period, some of the paramedics, they go into my pockets, and they pick out, I don't know, what do I have here? No, it's a leaflet from my university. Say they took out my keys and my wallet, and they put it in the paramedic bag that's outside of my peripheral vision, and they put it in a pocket, and the pocket has a number on it, 1103, right? Now, near-death experience, according to these reports and to the academic journals, and there's academic books like the Handbook of Near-Death Experiences, you can go buy it and research it for yourself. Near-death experiences where I report after surviving a few weeks in hospital, I'm awake and alive, I see the paramedic that took my belongings, and I say, hey, I know who you are. You took my wallet and my leaflet and my keys, and you put it in the paramedic bag, and on the pocket, there was a number. It said 1103. And the paramedic's like, spooked out. How do you know? You were comatose. You were unconscious. You probably didn't have any life in you from the perspective of, you know, a stable heartbeat. This is impossible for you to know. Even if your eyes were open, which they weren't, it was outside of your peripheral vision. Now that is a near-death experience that has been independently verified. Not only by paramedic, but someone else that was there too. They could verify and say, yes, Hamza was right. We did take his stuff, put it into the paramedic bag. It did have that number on it. The bag was outside his peripheral vision. And yes, I was wearing these type of clothes because, for example, I could also give descriptions of the clothing and the room that I was in, or whatever the case may be, right? So that's independently verified. Now, according to the Handbook of Near-Death Experiences, they say that these type of independently verified reports are about 88% accurate. And what's interesting is that the Lancet report also gives amazing case studies, and if you were to read it, if you go to the Lancet and download the paper, you would see amazing case studies from a particular nurse. When she talks about old man, she took his dentures out, and she put them in the trolley, on the trolley, and basically, he wakes up saying, oh, my denture's back, I know where you put them. I know what clothes you're wearing that day. He even knew what they were saying during CPR. Like they had a very negative prognosis, for example, about his survival. And he was on top, screaming at them, saying, I'm still alive, I'm still alive. So he was seeing everything from above. Now, I don't know what the Islamic explanation for that is. Right? But I know, since there isn't an Islamic explanation, I don't know what it is in detail, but since there isn't an Islamic explanation, from a Muslim perspective, it still implies the hereafter, because you have to still relate to the supernatural in some way. So whether we reject the account from an Islamic theological perspective is almost irrelevant. It's about the explanation. How do we explain this data? And from an Islamic perspective, the only way to explain it is via spiritual means, right? That's in line with the Quran and the prophetic traditions. So therefore it still indicates the spiritual world, the concept of a hereafter, another realm of existence. Now from a secular materialistic perspective, I don't know what they can say. Yes, there are other reports and journals that try to, dismiss it because of methodological mistakes, whatever the case may be. I'm not saying this is absolute evidence. I'm not saying it's the gospel truth. But the more we study these realities, the more it becomes an indicator for the supernatural. And it shows that consciousness, our conscious awareness, is not contingent on a functioning physical body. And that's very interesting. I'm not talking about, crazy spiritual stuff that you read on the New Age spiritual books. I'm talking about academic work, the handbook of near-death experiences, journals that have been published in the Lancet. Now, there may be counterfactual evidence, who knows? I'm not claiming I studied this in depth, but what's interesting, there is some indicators that are pointing to the fact that your life or conscious awareness is not dependent on a functional physical body. Now, before I get into the rational discussion, I want to focus on this theme of spirituality, focus on the theme of basically existential questions, meaning, what does it mean for me? What does it mean as a human being if we reject the hereafter? Listen very carefully. This is going to wake you up, and it will wake you up, hopefully. And if it does, then it might even make you grey, right? But these are serious questions. Serious questions, because if you reject the supernatural, you reject the akhirah in Arabic, which means the hereafter, then there are some key existential conclusions. Key conclusions that you have to face as a human being, regardless if you're religious or not. For instance, if you reject the hereafter, can we say you have ultimate hope? I mean, think about this. What does hope really mean? Hope means the expectation for something good to happen, right? I'm expecting something good to happen. Light at the end of the tunnel. Light at the end of the tunnel. But can you have a sense of ultimate hope if you reject the hereafter? Divine accountability on the day of judgment. Paradise. There is going to be light at the end of the tunnel. Can you have ultimate hope if you reject these things? No way. This doesn't prove there is a hereafter, but it raises an emotional and existential question. Or rather, an emotional and existential conclusion. Because think about this. You may have a great life for 60 years, 65 years, 70 years, but let me tell you something. 25% of this room is probably going to die of cancer. That's the statistics, 1 in 4, right? It's not a nice death. Many of us will die in hospital. We'll be ill, blind. Loss of bodily functions. God knows. Allah knows what's going to happen. But it's not going to be nice. It's not going to be nice. My grandfather, my dad's father, he was one of the most fittest men I knew in terms of his lifestyle and history. He was so strong. He had animal strength. Even in his mid-80s, he could pick up industrial heaters. He put coal in them, he could pick up himself. He used to carry 15 kilos of flour for around maybe a 2 hours trip from the village in Greece to Albania and back or something. I mean, this guy was made of something else. He was at the time when people were made of iron and the boats were made of wood. And that's the other way around. Today we're made of wood. It would burn and we crumble so easily. And the bolts are made of iron. Anyway, that's a different point. So, and he died a kind of slow death, if you like. He became blind and diabetic. He couldn't walk properly. This is life. This is the life cycle of the human beings. And this is why, as Muslims, we need to take care of our parents, because they took care of us. It's that life cycle, right? Because everyone's going to turn into a baby again eventually, generally speaking. So, at that time when you're dying, in the last few years of ill health, where hope really matters, on the hospital bed, when you're injected with morphine just to keep you alive and sane, and not to feel too much pain, where is the hope at that moment when it counts? Forget when you're in your 20s and 30s, you're deluded. You're in a state of ghafla in Arabic, a state of delusion, heedlessness. But when hope really counts, where is the light at the end of the tunnel? According to naturalism, which is there is no supernatural, everything can be explained by physical processes, there's no ultimate hope. You're going to end up being worm buffet. Worms buffet. The worms are going to eat you up. So there's no ultimate hope. Doesn't prove the hereafter, but emotionally, existentially, instinctively, it raises a question. Also for me, it shows how merciful God is, Allah is. Because atheists who generally follow a naturalistic philosophy, if they were true to their own beliefs, they should be slightly depressed in my view. But the reason they're not is because God has placed within us an innate nature to have this sense of ultimate hope, even though we have a worldview and philosophy that denies it. Because if you are true to your beliefs, then that's the outcome. No ultimate hope. Worm buffet. But what's very interesting, brothers and sisters, and this is even more fascinating, what about the concept of justice? The concept of ultimate justice. You can never have ultimate justice under naturalistic worldview. Impossible. How can you? Think about this, brothers and sisters. Imagine the 1940s Jewish lady. She saw her 4 boys get murdered in front of her by the evil Nazis. And her husband was killed, shot in the head in front of her. And now she's in the queue, and she's going to be thrown into the gas chamber. Where is her hope for ultimate justice under a naturalistic worldview? No supernatural, no divine accountability, no hereafter. Everything can be explained just by physical processes. Where is her ultimate hope? There is none. For justice, 0. And she dies. And then we say, oh, but we defeated them. We defeated the Nazis. We took them to the Nuremberg trials. We won. So what? According to her, that doesn't mean anything. According to your worldview, naturalism, you can't give your sense of justice to her. She's now nothing. You can't give something to nothing. She's not feeling that sense of justice. So for her, there's no ultimate hope for justice. No hope for ultimate justice for this lady. Doesn't prove the hereafter, I agree. But existentially, it raises some questions and maybe some conclusions. Following on from this, what about the concept of building a legacy? Isn't this like a metaphysical, spiritual sign, emotional sign for the hereafter? You know, we all want to be remembered, right? We want to leave a legacy. What does a legacy mean? A legacy means that your vision is manifested way after your death. And you just plant the seeds in your life. That's what a legacy is. That's why you can never really see your legacy in this lifetime, really, if you have a really good vision. Because your vision should last beyond your lifetime. So the sense of building a legacy, for me, that's a metaphysical, spiritual sign of, you know what? There is a hereafter. I'm going to be hearing stuff after my death, right? What about the sense of building a house? Buying a house, which you never really own. You only own it when you're almost dead these days, right? Isn't it? You only own a house when you're dead. You know, what, 50-year mortgages now? In Japan, I think they have generational mortgages. So you pay for the house and so do your kids and your grandchildren. It's not really yours. If you don't pay up, they'll just take your house. The irony, right? It's not really yours. But the point is, even buying a house, giving to your children the concept of a will, the concept of wanting everything to be fine in the last few days of your life, that you ask for forgiveness, these are metaphysical, spiritual indicators that it's going to continue. The story continues. What about the concept of guilt? Why feel guilty? What is that about? Oh, but we're moral. That doesn't mean nothing according to naturalism. We'll discuss that later. Why feel guilty? Now, social biologists, they basically say, you know what? You're guilty because it promotes survival, and our ultimate objective as biological organisms is for survival. But is that really true? Does guilt necessarily lead to survival? No, it doesn't. Guilt can also lead to you not surviving. Look at cockroaches. They survived, boy! Nuclear holocaust, the only things you see are rats and cockroaches. And they breed, multiply, survive like nobody's business. Go to some old gym and you see cockroaches galore. There's probably more cockroaches than you have hair follicles. Yeah? There's loads. They're the best survivors. Do you see them acting guilty? Does guilt, do they have this guilt mechanism that actually promotes their survival? Like, you know what? I don't think we should go to this gym because you know what? It's a bunch of moral people that are running this gym. Let's not infest this gym. Let's go to the other gym because it's run by immoral people. Do cockroaches have these discussions? I don't know. When was the last time you spoke to a cockroach? Right? I'm talking about the human cockroaches. Those are other types of people here. The Italian mafia when they say he's a cockroach, yeah? I'm not talking about those guys. I'm not the insects, right? So the point here is, guilt doesn't necessarily lead to survival. It could actually lead to you not surviving. Imagine I'm a tribesman, and for me to survive, I have to fight the other tribe. If I'm feeling guilty, I won't survive. So this sense of guilt for me doesn't only have a biological explanation, maybe a spiritual and existential one. It's an indicator for the hereafter, because guilt is like your moral compass. It allows you to navigate through this kind of ocean of ethical dilemmas, right? And really, if you deny the afterlife, the hereafter, if you believe in philosophical naturalism, there's no supernatural, everything can be reduced to something physical, explained by a physical process, then what difference does it make when we die? If I lived my life as an angel, and you lived your life as the devil, what difference does it make, man? What difference does it make? Tell me. Put the cards on the table, bruv, as we say in Hackney. What difference does it make? Tell me, intellectually. What difference does it make? Mother Teresa, worm buffet. Hitler, worm buffet. Stalin, worm buffet. David Cameron, worm buffet. Right? Samaritan, worm buffet. Murderer, worm buffet. It makes no difference. Just read the stories of the Christians under Stalin that were tortured by the communist torturers in the prison camps. Read the autobiographies. And then the Christians would write, by the way, we should mention this more, 6 million Christians, I believe, were massacred and died under Stalin. We need to remember them too. We're human beings. One innocent life gone, it's like the whole of humanity is dead. This is the Quran. This is what the Quran teaches us. Save a life, you save humanity. You kill an innocent life, it's like killing the whole of humanity. So we need to remember this. 6 million of these lives. Forget the numbers, even if it was this one. So the point here is, you read the autobiographies, I have one in our library, and basically the communists would be saying, the torturer would be saying, who cares? I can pull out your fingernails and torture you because I'm not accountable to this divine, so-called divine. We're all going to be worm buffet. We're all material stuff. At least he was honest, right? With his worldview. Because that's the logical consequence of naturalism. If you're just physical stuff, you're explained by physical processes, no supernatural, no hereafter, no divine accountability, then who cares? Angel, worm buffet. Devil, worm buffet. You're in the grave, you're going to face the grave. Dancing with worms. It should be a new film, isn't it? There's an old film called Dancing with Wolves. It should be Dancing with Worms. Have these zombies around. Just to make us realize that that we've zombified our own intellects. We have decompartmentalized our minds. It's okay now to be an atheist and a naturalist and yet still think that you have a right for ultimate hope intellectually. Emotionally you do because God gave you that inside you. But intellectually you have no intellectual foundation to say, well, there is a difference. You've got no intellectual foundation to say, yes, we do have ultimate hope. You have no intellectual foundation to say we have ultimate justice. You know what? Let me take this further. Much further. And listen to this. Under naturalism, under atheism, intellectually, what difference is there between me and a 6-foot chocolate bunny? Apart from the bunny being sweeter, obviously. My wife would differ. But anyway, so, what's the difference? What's the difference between myself and a 6-foot chocolate bunny? I'm asking the question. Intellectuals at Swansea University, under naturalism, is there a difference between myself and a 6-foot chocolate bunny? The floor is open. Well, let me tell you some of the answers I've heard throughout this talk. But Hamza, we have emotions, we're human, we have meaning and consciousness. Oh, thank you for elaborating on a religious discourse for me. What does that mean under naturalism? Emotions? Just neurochemicals firing. Meaning? Neurochemicals firing, which are further reduced to electrons, further reduced to physical stuff. Why is there any intrinsic value in that? Don't get sentimental, bro. It's just neurochemicals firing. A certain arrangement of neurochemicals firing according to your worldview, just physical stuff. Oh, but you're human. What does that mean according to your worldview? It's reduced to physical stuff, physical processes. Just an arrangement of electrons. So if I were to basically crush this chocolate bunny, then crush myself, there's no real difference according to that worldview, intellectually. That's a rearrangement of carbon. Voila, a rearrangement of carbon. This is why I really respect the old the old atheists. Like Arthur Schopenhauer. He was considered an existential philosopher. He was considered a pessimist. He wrote a book on the evils and suffering of the world. He wrote an essay called Suicide, and I believe in that essay he said, the greatest act of freedom is to kill yourself. So you didn't choose your birth, but you can choose your death. Sarah, by respecting, he was honest with his worldview. And do you know what he said? He said more like deluded with the kind of, the health that we have in this time-limited space. But when you progress in your age, you're going to get ill. Loss of sight, reason. And that's why he said that the world shouldn't have existed. It's better that it didn't exist. He also says that the new form of address shouldn't be Monsieur, mein Herr, or Sir. It should be Soci Malone, companion de misères, my fellow sufferer. That's life for him. But that's so true. That's why I respect him. I take my intellectual hat off for him. Because he followed through logically with the consequences of his worldview. Atheist, pessimist. Well, there's your worldview. There's no real difference. There's no real difference between me and a chocolate bunny. There's a relative difference. The difference is relative to you and your limited physical understanding. But we're talking about ultimate difference here. We're talking about truth. The truth of the matter. Not that it's relative to you. Of course it's relative to me because I feel pain. But ultimately, what does that mean, I feel pain? It means nothing under naturalism. Reduced to physical processes. Neurochemical firings. Which is further reduced to electrons, further reduced to physical stuff. Intrinsically, it has no value. So, it's quite a gloomy situation, YOLO, right? Next time someone texts you, YOLO, man, you only live once, come to the pub, yeah? Whatever. Get pissed, as they say. And he says YOLO. I'm like, YOLO for me. I went to this lecture and it's a sad state of affairs. Yeah, but it's true. If you follow through intellectually with the logical conclusions. By the way, I'm not saying atheists and naturalists don't have the right to feel that there is ultimate hope. I'm not saying they don't have a right to feel that there is value. No, God forbid. I'm not passing judgment. Everyone has a right for these feelings. But if you follow this philosophy, you have no intellectual basis. That's my point. So, brothers and sisters, before we go more into the kind of rational stuff, what's the Islamic perspective on YOLO? Well, really, in a nutshell, it's not YOLO, it's yo-yo. You were sent down by Allah, you're going to bounce back to Him. That's what it is. It's not YOLO, it's yo-yo. You were sent down by God and you're going to come back to Him. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Indeed, it's from Allah that we came, and it's to Him we're going to return. To Allah we belong, and to Him we're going to return. This is the kind of supplicational statement of the pious people when they're faced with calamity. Those who are faced with calamity say, to Allah we belong, and to Him we're going to return. Just to make us realize that this life is supposed to be limited and full of suffering. It's a testing ground in order for us to have an eternal bliss. So the Islamic paradigm is very simple, but yet profound. And I want you to listen very carefully what the Islamic paradigm is. Allah is saying, God is saying, that we were sent down here to worship Him. Now worship doesn't mean going to the institution once a week or once a month or when there's some kind of festivities. Worship is very profound in the Islamic tradition. Worship means that you love God, you love Allah, that you know Allah, that you obey Allah, and that you single out all acts of worship to Allah alone. Let's break this down. So why must I love God? Why must I love Allah? Well, you love yourself, right? Who loves themselves? I'm not talking from an egocentric perspective. I'm not talking from a narcissistic perspective. I'm talking about from the Erich Fromm perspective. Erich Fromm was a psychologist. He wrote the book, The Art of Loving. Download it. It's a brilliant book. And he said this type of love is not an egocentric type of love, but it's the type of love that is about that you want goodness for yourself. Who wants goodness for themselves? Everybody. Who wants pleasure? Everyone. Who wants to run away from pain? Everyone. Who wants to feel loved? Who wants to feel important? Who wants good friends? Good family? That's love. We love ourselves. Of course we do. In fact, if you don't love yourself, then you can't love other people anyway. If you can't empathize with the closest thing to you, which is yourself, how are you going to empathize with anybody else? And that's why people who hate, don't call them evil. Feel sorry for them. It's because they hate themselves. People who are jealous, it's because they're reading their story, not yours. People who judge and make judgments, it's got nothing to do with you. You should just say, bring it on. You should feel sorry for them. That's a symptom of underlying cause because they don't love themselves, because they judge themselves. They feel insecure. So don't take these people personally. Actually smile in the face of that adversity and try and help them, because that's a symptom of a cause. It's a cry for help. So don't fall for the trap to engage negatively. Be like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like forbearance. Forbearance means patience with adversity and harm. He had forbearance, he had ilm, humanity. When someone pulled him by the neck very hard and left a mark and demanded a repayment for a loan, he didn't go say, excuse me, what did you do? He didn't put up his sleeves and want to do a fist fight, but he was very calm. And he told his companion that you should advise me to pay my debt on time. And you should advise the man to ask for his debt nicely. And he was very calm. And the person who did that to the Prophet ﷺ became a Muslim. Because he was looking for the signs of forbearance. Because one of the signs of prophethood is that when someone harms you, you have this tranquil, compassionate patience. So be like that. But anyway, where we're going with this, that's another diversion. The point here is, we love ourselves. Now, how does this link to the love of Allah? Well, think about the 11th century theologian Al-Ghazali. The 7th century theologian Al-Ghazali, he wrote a book called Muhabba, Love, Uns, Intimacy. And he basically argues an amazing statement. He says, if you love yourself and you're rational, you have to love Allah. You have to. Why? And I'm summarizing what he said. Because who made you? Who created the asbab, the physical causes in the universe for you to use to love others, for you to use to run away from pain and to embrace pleasure, for you to embrace goodness and run away from evil? Who created those physical causes? Allah. Who is the loving? Al-Wudud, meaning the loving that is giving, coming from the Arabic word wud, which means the loving that is giving. Who is the loving? Who is the source of love? Who loves you more than your mother does? Allah, as we know in the prophetic tradition. So how can you not love Allah? Rationally, you have to love Allah. Rationally, you have to love Allah. And also, if you understand Allah's names and attributes, you must love Him. For example, as we said, Allah is the loving. He has a boundless love. And we know when we think about Allah's names and attributes, we know that we don't do any comparison with creation. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ. They are distinct and different and unique. They're transcendent. But He is the loving. He has a boundless love. If I told you the next few minutes, someone's going to walk into this room and they're the most loving human being, the most loving human being, every single one of you, even if you're an alpha male, every single one of you inside you know what you're going to say? I want to taste some of this love. I want to know who this person is. The most loving human being? Wow, I need his number. I want to get his digits. Right? Isn't it? Right? Not in a haram way. Just to taste that love. He or she is the most loving being in the world. If that's the case for a human being, imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whose love transcends any other type of love. And do you know why Allah's love transcends all types of love? Because He is al-ghani, which means the rich, the independent. He doesn't love based on a need. Think about this. Allah's love is not based on a need, and yet He loves. Think how pure that love is. And that's why if you don't love Him, then you're mad. You don't know what love is. And that's why when people say Islam's not a religion of love, they're mad too. And frankly, they're sick here. People are sick in the heart. And there's some Muslims who don't talk about love. Didn't the Prophet ﷺ say, love for Andreas, what you love for yourself? This is in Bukhari in the traditions. Andreas means human beings, love for humanity, what you love for yourself. And this leads to the next point. Brothers and sisters in this room, and friends, and haters, I love you. I do. Honestly, my dad told me to be like this, but also it's in our tradition. I love you. I love goodness for you. I love happiness for you. I love guidance for you. I love for you not to be harmed. This is a sense of loving compassion I have for you. But the question is, am I in love with you? Imran, am I in love with you? Well, maybe yes, you, because I know you. What's your name, bro? Muhammad, am I in love with you? You don't know. But I love him because the Prophet told me, upon whom be peace, love for humanity what you love for yourself. Be compassionate. But I'm not in love with him. In order for me to be in love with him, what do I have to do? I have to get to know him. What makes you tick? Share some experiences. Understand some of your values, your thoughts, and your perspectives. Share some of our values. Discuss things. That's getting to know Him. So this is why we must know Allah, because it's a means to love Him as well. And how can you love and worship something you don't know? How do you get to know Allah? Read His book, the Quran, understand His names and attributes, reflect upon them. His names and attributes. He is Al-Khaliq, the creator, Al-Latif, the subtle, Al-Wali, the governor, the protector, Ar-Rahman, the intensely merciful, Al-Wudud, the loving, Ar-Rahim, the giver of mercy. This is Allah. These names and attributes have a role in your life. Think about the name Al-Hakim. He is the wise. Allah has the picture, we just got the pixel. And proof, here's the proof. You know when you look back into your past, you always say, I say this all the time, who wrote the script? Who put the notes together? Because it wasn't me. It wasn't me. Because certain key moments in your life facilitate you being you right now. There were some dots being connected that are out of your control. Allah Al-Hakim, He is the wise. He's got a wise plan for you. And that's how you get to know Allah. And the next point of why we should worship Allah is that we should obey Him. Now this obedience is not a blind, irrational obedience. Because in Islam, there is a kind of balance between the aql, the intellect, and the naql, the text. But in what way? We use our intellect to find out what God commanded. What's the implication of the command? What is the context? What does the command really mean and imply? So we have to find out what Allah really says in a particular situation. Once you use your intellect and find out, then you say, I obey. Why? Because Allah is the authority, you're not. And it's just rational to do that. Here's an example. Imagine this auditorium, we're on a plane. And you hear, ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelt. We're going to be approaching some severe turbulence. What do? You don't jump and say, prove it, bro! Prove it, man! I'm standing up, I'm going to do a jiggy. Yeah? Imagine start doing that. We laugh at you. That's irrational. Everyone buckles up. Why do they buckle up? Because they know and they respect the authority of the pilot. He studied, he has an authority of knowledge concerning turbulence and the plane. Yes or no? Is that a blind obedience? It's a rational obedience. Same with Islam, we have a rational obedience. Even if you don't know the wisdom or the processes behind certain things or the command. If you know this came from God, then it's irrational to disobey. And finally, worship also includes that we must single out all acts of worship to Him. Now, please read the Quran to understand why we must worship Allah. But I want to give you some tips concerning this final point. Why must we single out all acts of worship to God alone? Firstly, because by definition, He is the being worthy of all worship. But also, think about the concept of gratitude. Gratitude is such an important concept. And the proof in this is that the first chapter of the Quran is a summary of the whole of the Quran. The ulama, the scholars say, the first chapter of the Quran is a summary of the whole of the Quran. Right? It's about Tawheed, the oneness of God, the fact that He deserves to be worshipped. What does the first line of the first chapter that summarizes the Quran say? It says, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. All perfect gratitude and thanks belong to the Lord of everything that exists. Gratitude. Gratitude, brothers and sisters, is the key to worship. It's a key to worship. And here's some proof. 2 examples. Number 1, listen very carefully. Listen. There is something in your life that you are given freely every moment, but you don't deserve it and you don't own it. There is something that's given in your life freely that's so precious that you don't deserve and you don't own. So if it's true, there is something that's given freely that you don't deserve and you don't own, how should it make you feel? Grateful, right? So what is this thing? It's your life. It's your conscious awareness. Your life, every moment. You may think, oh, that's really obvious. Well, that attitude shows how ungrateful you are. We don't think about the simple things. Even New Age spirituality that's devoid of religion and God, they say if you're grateful, you're going to be happy. So think about your existence. You don't own your own life. You can't even create a fly. You can't create a fly. There's nothing you've done to deserve another moment in your existence. Such an amazing gift. So be grateful to the one who gave you this life. Allah, God. And don't be like the one who receives 100 pounds every day and after a year he thanks the 100 pounds but doesn't thank the one that gave it to him. This is rational stuff, brothers and sisters. absolutely irrational stuff, to thank the one that gave us these blessings, that gave us this gift that we receive freely, that we don't earn and we don't own. You know what's interesting as well, brothers and sisters? The Quran says you could never count the blessings of Allah. You couldn't enumerate His blessings. And this is so true. Do you want to hear the proof? And this is regardless if you have a happy life or a sad life. And you know what the blessing is in this context? Your heartbeat. If I said to you, you have 100 heartbeats left, and in order to get another 100 heartbeats, you have to give me a mountain of gold, what would you do? You would spend the first 100 heartbeats to find that mountain of gold to get an extra 100 heartbeats. That's how precious a heartbeat is. Get a stethoscope, put yourself in a room with no technology, no phones, and just listen to your heartbeat for 10 minutes. You see how vulnerable you are. You see how much ungrateful you are for just one heartbeat. You're not in control. Tell your heart to stop. Stop, stop. It won't stop. And you know what's interesting? The Quran is right. You can never count all the blessings of Allah. Heartbeat's a blessing, right? You can never count your heartbeats, ever. The first 2 years you have a backlog. You haven't learned how to count. When you're sleeping, you can't count. When you're eating, you can't count. Going to the toilet, you shouldn't count. Right? All of these things. So, practically, you'll never be able to count every single heartbeat. So it's true, you can never enumerate the blessings of Allah, and that's just one thing, which is the heartbeat. Imagine everything else. So be grateful for that, and gratitude is the key to worship. So if you do worship Allah, what happens? You're eligible for His grace, for His mercy, which is paradise. If you actively reject this, you're eligible for the absence of His mercy, which means the nar, the fire, which you chose, because you ran away from God's mercy. The absence of His mercy is the fire. So the question is not, how can a loving God send me to the fire? No, that's not the question. The question is, how can you choose hell over a loving Lord? That's the question. Because Allah gave you the choice, you have free will. That's why you're elevated higher than the angels, because the angels have no free will. Allah is saying, accept my rahmah, my mercy, which is the guidance, which is Islam, which is His worship, or run away from it. And if you run away from it, it's your consequences. That's why in the Quran, the people of hell, what do they say? They say, if only we used our intellect. So we're here to worship Allah, and hopefully that was a detailed but concise and profound way of articulating worship in Islam. Now you may argue, okay, Hamza, this is very interesting. Very interesting. But how do you know? How do you know? You're making claims, bro. You're just making claims. You're putting things out from the sky, acting all nice, religious eloquence and rhetoric. You're just another stupid medieval person. Why should I listen to you? You have no proof. Everything's been spiritual and existential so far. Where's your evidence that these claims are true? Well, to be extensive and comprehensive concerning this point, we need another lecture. However, I want to plant seeds in your heart and mind, so hopefully they'll be planted and they could grow into the fruits of faith, the fruits of love, loving Allah. So, if we can show good reasons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, and we could show that the Quran, which is His word, cannot be explained naturalistically, meaning it came from Him, the supernatural, then whatever it says is going to be true. I call this the spiritual algebra. Think about the logic. If God said X, which is the unknown, X, what's the truth value of X? It's true, right? If God said X, and God is the knowing, the wise, He has the totality of wisdom and knowledge. If He said X, something, what is the truth of X, that thing? It's true, right? So all you have to show is that Allah is a reality, and that the Quran is from Him. I just want to plant some seeds. Obviously, it takes a longer lecture to do this. But there's two things I want to mention very quickly about Allah's existence. The first point I want to mention is that you don't need any evidence. Self-evident truth. The concept of a cause, an ultimate cause, is a self-evident truth that's implanted in every single human being. This is not only a sociological, psychological reality, but but it's also an intellectual reality. And don't say, oh, what kind of evidence is that? Self-evident truth. Shut up and listen. Because if you study philosophy, I'm doing philosophy at a postgraduate level now, and you see there are so many self-evident truths, axioms, assumptions that you have to adopt in order for your worldview and theory to be coherent. For example, for science to work, what do you need? For science to be science, you need an assumption. What's the assumption? That you trust your rational faculties, that your cognitive faculties can do science. That's an assumption of science. Study the works of Professor Thomas Nagel and others. They say one of the assumptions of science is a rational mind. You need a rational mind. You need a mind that you can eventually trust, that can eventually lead to the truth. Yes, it can do mistakes here and there, but eventually it will find truth. Eventually it can do the science and form scientific conclusions. That's an assumption of science. Science can't prove it, because to do so you're arguing in a circle. Also, another assumption in philosophy and science and all of these things is the world is real. This table is external to my mind. Yes or no? Is the table external to my brain? Prove it. To cut a long story short, you can't prove it, okay? And I'm not saying that arrogantly, because it's in the literature. You can't really prove this table is external to my mind. After all, the experience that you're having and I'm having could just be in our brains. Your brain could be in Mars, and there's mental probes in your brain, and an alien is making you think and feel what you're thinking and feeling now. Just read Descartes, right? And you see, we could be just deluded about the whole thing. This could be an illusion. You can't really prove it. But you know what? We accept it as a self-evident truth, so we build a coherent worldview. Right? So there are many of these self-evident truths. God's existence is no different. I don't have time to explain why, but let me plant that seed for you to understand further. And this is in line with the Islamic concept of the fitrah, which means the innate disposition that understanding God's reality and the fact that He deserves to be worshipped is based on an innate capacity called the fitrah. Okay? So study that for yourself. But I believe we have over 20 good arguments. I'm just going to give you one, just in summary. I'm going to give you the academic stuff. It's consciousness. Consciousness, right? Let me tell you something. Naturalists cannot answer this question. Atheists can't answer this question. There's something in the science of consciousness, in neuroscience and the philosophy of the mind, that really closes the door to the atheist and naturalistic narrative. It says, sorry, wrong code. The locks have been changed. You can't come to this house of rationality. Why? Because in the philosophy of the mind and in neuroscience, there is something called the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness is basically based on two major things. Number one, they don't know what it is like for a conscious organism to be conscious. Meaning, Muhammad, we don't know, as the scientific community or even as philosophers, what it's like for you to be chewing gum in this lecture hall. You're chewing gum, right? Good. We're good for something else. I don't know what it's like for you to be chewing gum. That's an inner subjective experience that you have. I don't know what it's like for Fatima to fall in love. I don't know what it's like for Imran to have a chocolate milkshake. That's an inner subjective experience for him. He may use words like creamy, chocolatey, sweet. Those are words. Words are vehicles to meaning. Meaning is a representation of the inner subjective state. We can't access that. Science is third person. His inner subjective experience is first person. This is well known. Read the works, famous 1970s paper by Professor Thomas Nagel. I think it's called, What is it like to be a bat? If anything is conscious, there is a particular likeness to be in that conscious state. What is it like for Imran to fall in love? Or for Muhammad to chew gum? Or for Fatima to smell roses? I don't know. We don't know. And science can never tell us. It's not God with the gaps. We're not squeezing God as an explanation. No. This is a metaphysical question. Science can never tell us. Why? Because if I were to map out all the neurochemical pathways in your brain, you could never make the logical leap that I now know what it's like for Imran to fall in love. It's just chemicals. You're making a leap. It can't tell us nothing about first-person subjectivity. So the other part of the hard problem of consciousness is, why does Iman have inner subjective states and they arise from physical processes? How does that happen? How does Iman have an inner subjective experience of having a milkshake, right? How does that happen? And that's supposed to come from physical processes. How does the inner subjective experience arise from non-conscious physical processes? Hold on a second. How can inner subjective consciousness come from non-conscious physical processes? There's an Arab saying, I can only give you something that I have. If I have £5, I can give you £5. If I don't have £5, I can't give you £5. So if non-conscious code, non-rational physical processes give rise to consciousness, inner subjective experience, well, how do you explain that? It's quite spooky. Because consciousness cannot come from non-consciousness, right? To believe in such a thing, that something could come from nothing. So, the argument here is what best explains this. Now, as Muslims, we're not denying the science. In Islam, we believe in the asbab of Allah, which means the causes Allah has put in the universe to manifest His will. We believe in it. Bring on the science. We love science, right? We don't have a problem. What we're saying is here, though, that there is not a gap. It's not a God of the gaps. We're not squeezing God as an explanation. We're saying science is de-scoped. I wrote an essay for my postgrad called Does Consciousness Pose a Special Problem for Scientific Explanation? And my lecturer, the academic that marked it, she was in agreement. She was like, it's true. Science has a limited scope. It can't go into the inner subjective realities. So what do some people do? They reject the fact that you have inner subjective experience. This is called eliminative materialism. Others, they say, no, you can somehow reduce it to physical processes. What's that called? Reductive materialism. Others say, well, the more complex you are, you're bound to get consciousness, which is emergent materialism. Then you have panpsychism. Panpsychism, everything is conscious. Spooky, yeah? Even an electron. An electron has a, existential crisis. Well, it's not really conscious, they call it proto-consciousness. But really, for me, that's just making God replacements. They're making metaphysical claims. How can you say such a thing? You say a God replacement is an eternal, pervading consciousness. God replacement. Just like the multiverse. There's no scientific evidence for it. But what do they say? There's an infinite number of universes. That's the power to create another universe. Okay, infinite, powerful, Keep on going with the names and attributes of God. Do you see my point? These are God replacements. And that's when science is not science anymore. It's when it gets into the realm of metaphysics. Right? They have no job in this. But anyway, the point here is, there are many isms and schisms that try to explain the hard problem, and they all fail. That's why even till today, they still call it the hard problem of consciousness. So for me, I think the best explanation is, accept the physical scientific evidence, but also if you have a theistic explanatory model that says an all-aware being, Allah, created the universe to have physical beings that yes have a brain, a physical brain, but also an internal subjective reality, and Allah gave them the ability to be aware of the inner subjective states. So comprehensive. It's not anti-scientific. It actually is giving you a greater explanatory model. Naturalism, which basically says no supernatural, everything can be explained by physical processes, has no say in this reality. The key don't work, bro. The code's wrong. You can't open the door to the house of rationality when it comes to this question. Hence, for me, it's a very powerful indicator for God's existence. Finally, brothers and sisters, do you have evidence for the Quran? We've got loads of evidence for the Book of Allah. Spiritual, existential, philosophical. But I just want to stick to one because I think this one's very profound. Now, this argument, and there's many others, but do your own research, I just want to plant the seeds in your heart and mind, is about the unique structural features of the Quran. Meaning the Quran has an amazing literary coherence. Here's some background information. It's well established the Quran was revealed over a 23-year period. And the verses that were revealed over a 23-year period, many of them are for specific times and places across that 23-year period, right? For specific times and places. Now, every one of the 114 chapters has a unique literary coherence and structure. Now the question is, how can that be? If many of its verses were for specific times and places, how can it have this amazing coherent structure? It implies the author knew the future, because there must have been some planning, structure, arrangement happening before the very causes of the reasons of the verses that were basically revealed for specific times and places. So it implies the author knew the future, which makes sense of God. Let me explain this by using an amazing example, which is the second chapter of the Quran. Surah Al-Baqarah. Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter of the Quran, is called the Cow, has 286 verses. This chapter was revealed over a 9-year period, specifically intensely over a 2-year period. Many of its verses were specific times and places. Yet you have something called ring composition. If you want to learn about ring composition, read the works of Mary Douglas. It's called Thinking in Circles. Many primitive languages use ring composition. It's useful for memorization. But the point here is there's many types of ring composition. The type we're talking about is, imagine you put a mirror in the middle of the text. What's mentioned in the first half is reflected in the second half. That's ring composition. Now we're not saying it's miraculous or it's from God because it has ring composition. No. We're saying it's amazing because it has detailed ring composition, even though it was revealed over a specific period of time for specific instances over that period. Which means the author must have known the future. So for example, if you look at verses 1 to 20, you have faith versus unbelief as a general theme. Verses 21 to 39, you have the general theme about God's creation, Allah's creation. Verses 40 to 103, you have the deliverance of law. Verses 104 to 141, you have being tested. You have the middle themes, which is verses 142 to 152, which is about the changing of the direction of prayer, right? And being tested and completing good deeds. And what's very interesting, in this middle section you have the middle verse, which is the 143rd verse. And in this verse you find the word middle. Now, verses 153 to 177, they mirror verses 104 to 141, which is about being tested. Verses 178 to 253, they mirror verses 40 to 103, which is about the deliverance of law. Verses 254 to 284, they mirror God's creation, the theme God's creation, which is apparent in verses 21 to 39. And verses 285 to 286 mirror verses 1 to 20, which is about faith versus unbelief. You may think, wow, this is amazing. This is nothing. I haven't even scratched the surface. Our classical scholars spoke about this, by the way, and even academics today. Professor Raymond Farron. Go check out his works. He studies this in depth. And you know what? You see each section? There's ring composition in each section. There's a ring within a ring. And not just that, and in some of those sections, there are more rings. There's a ring within a ring within a ring. And this is why in our tradition, if you can't afford mahar, which is the dowry for your wife, you can also recite the Quran. And by extension, if you do so, you're giving her rings within rings. Anyway, so, and let me prove this point. If you go to this section, which is about God's creation, verses 254 to 284, you have a very special verse, which is the verse of the throne. Verse 255, we recite this after each prayer. It's a very special verse for protection, for so many things. Look at the ring composition of this one verse within the ring composition of the entire category within the whole chapter. Look at the ring composition. You can just see it for yourself. Look at the middle theme. He knows what's before them and what will be after them. Look at the first theme. It's about His names and attributes. Allah, there is none worthy of worship except He, the ever-living, the ever-watchful. That's reflected by the last theme, and He is the most high, the most supreme, names and attributes. The second theme, neither drowsiness nor sleep overtake Him. That's reflected by the penultimate theme, and the preservation tires Him not. Sleep, drowsiness, tiredness, same theme. You have the third theme, to Him belongs whatever is in the heavens and earth. Reflected by this theme here, His throne extends over the heavens and the earth. Then you have the one before the middle theme, which is who is there that can intercede with Him except by His permission, which is mirrored by, reflected by, and they encompass not a thing of His knowledge except for what He wills. Permission, what He wills. And the middle thing is, He knows what's before them and after them. Do you see that ring structure? That ring structure is within a ring structure, within the ring structure of one chapter that was revealed over a 9-year period, specifically over 2 years, for specific times and places. And what's very interesting, the first half of this chapter talks about the past, the middle theme talks about the present, and the rest talks about the future. You tell me, if this came from a desert Arab in the 7th century, had no computers, and these verses were revealed for specific times and places, you say there's a naturalistic explanation, bring it, I want to hear it. It is no wonder, the famous scholar, Dr. Draz, Muhammad Abdullah Draz from Al-Azhar University, wrote a book called The Eternal Challenge. And he basically says that, look at the structure here. This can only mean the author knew the future. Because there's like some kind of pre-structured arrangement prior to the causes of revelation, which implies that the author knew the future. By the way, this is throughout the whole of the Quran. And there are different types of structure arrangements in the Quran. There's even a phonetic type of structure. The sound gives the structure. Who's memorized the Quran in this room? Anyone? Be honest, it's not time to be humble now. Anyone memorize the Quran? Come here, bro. I want you to recite something, please. Yeah, it's a very short chapter. It's by the one that says the early afternoon by time. By time. You know this always. Okay. Listen to this and explain the phonetic structure, please. Listen.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
Okay, exactly. Stay there. So the brother just recited the chapter that is translated as follows: by time, indeed, man is in a state of loss. Ibn Kathir, the classical exegete, said, man is in a state of destruction. Unless, right, except those who believe and do good deeds, and they call towards the truth and patience, right? Right? Now, except those who believe, do good deeds, call to the truth, and call to patience. Now, one of the Orientalists, I think his name was Richard Bell, he actually tried to dismantle this chapter, saying it has no very good coherence. There's no structural literary coherence here, because the last few verses are basically just added on haphazardly. You could tell, he said. But there's another scholar, or an Orientalist if you like, Professor Neil Robinson, who wrote the book Discovering the Quran, a Contemporary Approach to Veiled Text. He discusses the phonetic coherence of this chapter. And he starts with the first verse. Do the first verse again, please.
والعصر.
What's the last word?
الرا.
No, the last word.
Oh, the last word. عصر.
Yeah, say it. Say it.
عصر.
Yes. That means time, right? Or the afternoon prayer, if you like. Did you notice what happens to his throat? He has to squeeze it. The word asr comes from asara, which means to squeeze. And you have the word asir, which means juice. And in that time they used to squeeze the grapes to bring the juice. And what's very interesting, the whole of the word, the consonants, asara, ain, sa, ra, yeah, sa, ra, is squeezed out the whole chapter. Recite the whole chapter again. If you have sensitive ears, you'll see it. Recite the whole chapter.
والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
Those verses that the Orientalists so-called said that they're just haphazardly stuck on there have a phonetic coherence connection. Because you have إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Asr. It's squeezed out phonetically in the whole chapter. Is that okay, bro? So, I just wanted to give that to you because The Quran is amazing. When people study the Quran, there's certain structural features are just phenomenal. And you could even see this in the English language. That's why I focused on this. Because you don't need to know any Arabic. You need to study the themes yourself. So, these are the seeds to be planted in your heart and mind. But don't forget, the ultimate objective is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And just to end, you may argue, well, how do I get there? How do I get to the hereafter? How do I get to this eternal beautiful place called paradise? It's very simple. Worship Allah. Love Allah, know Him, get to know Him. And follow the spiritual path, obey Him, single all acts of worship to Him alone. And when you do this, you'll be people of compassion. As the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, said to his wife Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, "Oh Aisha, be compassionate. When you have compassion in something, it elevates it. When you remove compassion, it degrades it." The Prophet ﷺ said that Allah is the merciful, right? Allah is kind and compassionate. He loves kindness and compassion. The Prophet ﷺ said that show mercy and you will be shown mercy by Allah. Remember the prostitute, the famous prophetic tradition, the prostitute. We were talking about this in the car with Iman. About sometimes we judge people because of their action. Like people are lost because of their action. Like, remember our own actions, bro. What about the actions of the heart? We may have some arrogance that we don't even know. That maybe we won't be forgiven for. But the prostitute, according to this prophetic tradition, when she fed a thirsty dog, where did Allah take her? To paradise. Because she had this overwhelming word, mercy. So show mercy, even to animals, Allah will show mercy to you. This is how you get there, guys. Worship Allah, show mercy, and inshallah we'll see each other in paradise. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So I guess it's Q&A time. By the way, we were live streaming this to around 100,000 people. Say salam. Say salam alaikum. Salam alaikum, guys.